So then Trump comes back and announces that now there's 23 of 32 nations that have met their 2% because of Trump. And now they promise to go up to 5. And of course, the Spanish socialist communist foreign minister said that they are not going to go up to 5 and they might not make it to 2. And Trump just basically said, okay, I hope you don't get in a war. And the same thing with Canada. Although Mr. Carney in Canada says he's going to spend $40 billion and get up there. So they hated Trump on NATO, and he saved NATO, basically.
Hello and welcome to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. We are on our Saturday edition, and thanks for everybody for joining us this weekend. Victor has been looking at, in our middle segment, historical moments in U.S. history and world history too, and we just finished World War II last week, so this week we're looking at the post-war or the Cold War globally, and he'll be talking about the Berlin Airlift. So stay with us for that on the second segment. Otherwise, we're going to start with some polls on Trump and his actions in Iran, and then we'll look at the theater that is otherwise known as budget hearings in the Congress. So stay with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Victor is the Martin and Neely Anderson Senior Fellow in Military History and Classics at the Hoover Institution and the Wayne and Marcia Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College. You can join him at his website, victorhanson.com, and the name of the website is The Blade of Perseus. Everything Victor writes is there, and you can join for special ultra material for $6.50 a month or $65 a year, and we'd love to have everybody. So, Victor, the polls look really good because I know that there's a lot of controversy out there whether the MAGA base would support Trump, and we have some polls that came out by JL Partners. 58% of Republicans back U.S. military strikes in Iran. 65% of MAGA supported the military strikes in Iran. And then another statistic was Trump voters, 60% of them support Israel's war or think Israel's war is America's as well. And 81% of MAGA support the strikes, Israeli strikes. And then the last one is 73% of Americans in general agree that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. So Trump is in a win-win issue here, and his base is behind him. And that was
It's a 60, 70, 20, 30 issue, just like the border, just like transgenderism. It's no accident. Trump understands that when he surveys the political landscape, he looks at issues that are 60-40, 70-30, and he's always on the right side of them. And there is a MAGA dissident group, but to take one example, Rand Paul is really just one of maybe the other senators like Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski. They're all kind of independent, left, the dissidents. He's the only one in the Senate, and Massey's the only one in the House. And maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene. So they built up this whole left-wing media, built up this huge MAGA, and then they said Tucker Carlson. Well, Tucker Carlson said in his exchange with Ted Cruz that if he had known the truth that Iran had ordered a hit on Trump, he would nuke Iran. And then he called up Trump and apologized. So there was never any sizable MAGA group. And when you look at the polls, everybody should remember, I know that we've kind of driven this point home too much, but of the 20 or so polls that are listed in Real Clear Politics, to take one example, go back into the 2024 election and look what they were saying. And if you look at the Harvard-Harris poll or the PBS poll, the Washington Post, or Ipsos, or especially YouGov, they were off by 10, 12 points. So why would we believe any of them? Their whole point in life is to oversample left-wing people and non-Trump voters so they can build up enough. He's down by 10, he's down by 12. So when you have the accurate polls, and there are 3 of them, Rasmussen, Insider Advantage, and Trafalgar. And they got it right on the nose in 2024. And when you look at what they say, Trump is ahead anywhere from 2 to 5 to 8 points of approval. And Rasmussen said that even Hispanics, 54% approval, blacks 53, higher or the same as whites. And CBS, in a rare moment of honesty, said that 54% supported deportation. So it's not just the polls, it's the particular poll that matters. If you go back to 2016, 2020, 2024, the vast majority of polls had one purpose, sort of like the Des Moines Register poll that had him losing Iowa by 3 and then he won by 12, or the PBS poll the night before that said he was going to lose by 4, right? And he won by 1.5 million votes. And so the polls are in his favor, and they should be, because it's logical. You ask the average person, and AOC is not average, and the squad is not average. Do you want these lunatics in Tehran to have a nuclear weapon? The answer is no. The disagreement comes as to what degree of active concern do you support? Do you support invading them? No. Do you support embargoes? Yes. Sanctions? Yes. Do you support, if that doesn't work, to bomb them? Yes, if you don't go in there. And that's pretty much what he did.
Well, let's then turn to the Democratic Party. And recently, the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, had a Zoom conference with its new chair, Ken Martin. And Ken Martin, apparently exasperated with David Hogg, said this, and I quote, "You essentially destroy any chance I have to show the leadership I need to. The other night, I said to myself for the first time, I don't know if I want to do this anymore." And hold on, and if your audience will hold on with me. So there's that, which is, poor baby, true, but also shows dissension at the very top. And then also we know that Randy Weingarten, the teachers union leader, and Lee Sanders, the public employees union, both have left their positions at the Democratic National Convention. So they seem to be falling apart at the top.
Man, I can remember when I was growing up, the Democratic Party, they had the slickest old hands. They had a guy named Robert Strauss, Texan, Jewish guy from Texas. He was as slick as they came. He was no nonsense. He knew every delegate. He knew every congressperson. He knew every vote. He knew every accurate poll, and he would have never put up with any of this. David Hogg is just, I don't even know what he is. Out of a shooting, he became a loudmouth, and that was all he's ever done. He said he was going to put My Pillow out of business. Remember that? He's not a serious person. And then this Martin, if you said that polls show that the left are more mentally unstable than the right, and they do, and you see these people that are neurotic, then you put him in there. He's completely neurotic. Why would he say to a 25-year-old less than nothing, "Oh, you don't know what you've done to me"? He should have said, "Get the blank out of my office, you tin horn. Get out of here. You haven't done anything. You haven't lived your life. You're just a creation of the internet. Get out." And he should take charge of the party, and he's scared to. They're all scared. It's so funny. You've got these geriatric old white people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren, and they are terrified of AOC or Jasmine Crockett. They don't like them, but they're terrified, or the Squad, or Robert Garcia, or they're just terrified of them. And these people are, and they're in a van, and the van is the party. And Nancy and Chuck Schumer and all these people are in the back, and they're saying, "Please slow down." And they're going right over the cliff. And they're going, "No, this is fun." And they're going to take them right over the cliff. McGovern, just like 1972.
Did you see Nancy Pelosi just recently supported Trump's strike on Iran? And since you're speaking of both the heads, Chuck Schumer was recently taken to the hospital. I don't know if you saw that today.
Who was
Chuck Schumer was taken to the hospital today. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. He's 73 or 4.
Yes.
But he's under a lot of stress because he's polling maybe 20 points down against AOC. And Nancy Pelosi didn't look well either. She's 86. I give her credit for being so active as an octogenarian, but she was very pale. She doesn't have her Botox treatment. Her and she was trying to come out with words. She was word searching like Joe Biden. And when you have a party run by people that are septuagenarian, I know Trump is a septuagenarian, he's 79, but he's the sole exception. He's not he's surrounded by all these young people. Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, gosh, Tulsi Gabbard, they're all of them are young. And so that's it. That party is, I don't know what to make of it. It's just incoherent, and it's taken over by DEI. A lot of these people, when Jasmine Crockett said that Kamala Harris is so much better qualified than Donald Trump, and she's earned, no, she wasn't. She was picked because she was black and a woman. That's not me saying that. That's what Joe Biden said. He was terrified after the George Floyd, so he announced that. And then he said, oh my gosh, I'm stuck with the only two high-profile black women on my party. I've either got to pick Stacey Abrams, the election denialist, or Kamala Harris. And they said, you can't pick Kamala Harris. She can't speak the English language. And he did, and he learned. So they've been the best friends that Trump ever had, because the independent, when Trump tweets out things like AOC is a low IQ person and she needs to take the Montreal cognitive assessment and see if she can ace it like they tell me I did. He didn't say that I said I did, like they tell me I did. Then everybody says, God, that's not presidential. And he said the F word, and that's not, I don't like that. And then they think, and the alternative? I will take crude competence any day to obnoxious mediocrities.
Byron York had a great article in the Jewish World Review that was looking at this very phenomenon of the DNC and chronicling some of its conflicts and less than dynamic representatives and leaders. And he concluded this, but I think he's being optimistic myself. He says the Democrats are, quote, looking for a magic issue to use against Trump. They may well be doing that, but that's going to be just the end of them, because that's not a platform.
Border.
That's not a platform.
It's zero crossings. Nobody ever thought that would be possible. There's no crossings, period. End of story. Obrego Garcia. Oh, we've all got to rally to a spousal beater, a human trafficker, an M13 gang member, an illegal alien. That's whom are here. Oh, Luigi Mangione. He's so handsome. He's Sarnoff and Redux. Oh, but he's an assassin. The little 17-year-old African-American kid that stabbed the guy in the heart in Texas. They were saying that he's innocent. That didn't work out. The grand jury just indicted him for first-degree murder. So, and then it's Khalil, we've got to rally around an illegal alien who is fomenting violence at Columbia that we don't like anyway. And we got him out, and the first thing he does is go right back to the street and stick his tongue out and say, ha, ha, ha. Or, no, we're showing solidarity with the protesters in Los Angeles. We like to have them wave not just Mexican flags, but Iranian flags now and Palestinian flags. And they burn the American flag. How's that going to go down? So I don't know. It's kind of like we let 50 million people come in here illegally. We didn't assimilate them. We didn't integrate them. And then we took our universities and we destroyed them, and we made them 94% liberal faculty, and the curriculum is all anti-American. And we took 2 generations and pushed them through. And we thought that we were going to gain the institutions and we were going to change the demography and it would all be good for us. And what did they end up with? They ended up with a party of insane people who hate the United States and want something for nothing. And they're trying to defend all of that. He's right. They're looking for an issue. And maybe it's banning natural gas stoves like Gavin was going to do. Maybe it's more solar and wind mandates like Spain that almost ruined their entire electrical system. Maybe it's an open border like Biden. Maybe we need another Kabul. Maybe we should have hyperinflation at 9.2%. Maybe it's this mayor in New York that's going to give us free groceries. I don't know, but they're looking for something. And Donald Trump, you can keep going after him, but you got to remember that you tried to take him off the ballot. That was anti-democratic. You had 5 courtrooms. 93 indictments. You find him with the E. Jean Carroll and the Letitia James, you find him almost $500 million. And then you raided his house. You went through Melania's underwear drawer. You scattered documents all over the ground, and you put little tags, secret, top class. It was all performance art. And then after that, they tried to kill him twice. So that doesn't work anymore. Every time you did that, his polls went up.
I think that the social media is helping that phenomenon. So speaking of theater, I feel that these budget hearings are more often theater, and I have a feeling our audience too are more often theater than not. And just recently we had the interviewing or questioning of Pam Bondi before the budget committee. And I'm assuming that what this budget committee is up to is to seek out what budget all of these institutions of the government need and then balance it out so they can have their bigger budget. And so they're listening to the heads of these institutions. But you would think it was some sort of drama, because in this particular case, the DOJ Pam Bondi was basically insulted by a Pennsylvania congresswoman who was calling her incompetent and questioning her integrity, which, if you ask me, those are issues for the approval of her being put into the position and not the budget. And so I think that I'm with the audience here, and we're a little bit frustrated.
Well, I mean, everybody does it. The master of it is John Kennedy on the Republican side. He just eviscerates it, but he doesn't do it. He just he just repeats what they've said. That's what he does. He said, "You said this," and then he just lets them squirm, and he has some old Southern popular wisdom. But the problem with that art of embarrassing an appointee or a nominee or a cabinet member that comes up is, you have to do it with wit and funny. You can't just act like you're insecure, and you can't be a crybaby. So when you insult somebody like she did, Pam Bondi, and said basically, "Did you ever work for a foreign government?" And she said, "No, did you ever work for a foreign government?" And she said, "Well, I did for 1 year. I had a consultant contract with a foreign government." Well, I mean, if you got rid of all the people in Washington that have done that, my God, you wouldn't have nobody in government. But then she said, "You're the one," Pam said, "and you were the one that told all of us that you had spoken to Joe Biden and he was completely fine. In other words, you were misleading the entire..." And that woman, "How dare you do that, Mr. Chairman? Look what she's doing. You can't do this." And the public goes, that's what's wrong with you people. You dish it out and you can't take it. You're always projecting. And she just asked you a question. "Didn't you do that?" "Yes." And "I'm not on trial." So it's not going to work. The other thing, that the subtext about all of this, and this goes back to Trump's caginess. Trump has 23, I'll say that again, 23 Fox former anchors, former Fox analyst, or former Fox regular guest, or former Fox reporters. And that would include everybody from Tulsi Gabbard was a paid analyst, Pete Hegseth, Pam Bondi. So why does he do that? And the answer is that he looks at TV and he says, that person looks good on TV. That person is quick on their feet. That person is ad hoc. That person is extempore. And I don't care if they have a PhD from Oxford. I don't care about that. I want to know whether they can think on their feet and embarrass the left. And J.D. Vance is another one. And they put them out there. They look better. They act better. They sound better because that's what they do. They're public explicators. And when you see Carolyn, what's her name?
Levitt.
I mean, it's like somewhere Donald Trump got some mad scientist and they said, "What does the left hate the most?" And then mad scientist says, "Well, the left hates blonde white girls. They hate wholesome looking Midwest girls. They hate beautiful girls. They hate articulate girls. They hate girls that smile all the time with white teeth. They hate people who gush. They hate people that worship Donald Trump. as if he's a deity, and they hate people that have photographic memories, and they hate people that hate them. And then the mad scientists and Donald Trump says, can you put all those ingredients into this little DNA chromosome? And boom, out comes Caroline. And she's out there. She looks like she's a movie star, but she looks like a movie star off a farm in Kansas. Sweet, pleasant, innocent. I'm not saying she is. I don't know her. But she has no binder. She doesn't look like that. She's not, Corinne Jean-Pierre is, well, Peter, as I told you, not this again. And she says, no, another question that you're incorrect about because our fabulous teacher, our fabulous leader, Donald Trump. And then she goes on and they can't, she just makes their head explode. Kayleigh McEnhaney with her binders did, but she's cooked up in a lab to drive those people insane.
It's wonderful. Well, Victor, we are going to take a break and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about the Cold War following World War II. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. You can find Victor on X. His handle is @VD Hanson, and you can find him on Facebook at Hanson's Morning Cup. So come join us there. So Victor, interested in seeing all of the fallout from World War II, and especially the ending of World War II and unconditional surrender and the occupations that went on. So go ahead.
Just to remind everybody, we've been doing since January key events of the 20th century. So we started with the Russo-Japanese War. We looked at the Panama Canal, Russo-Japanese War, the income tax of 1913, the lead up to World War I and Great Depression. And we just finished World War II, 6 sessions on it. And now we're looking at 1948, from June 1948 to May of 1949. And what happened was, when the Allies knew they were going to win, they met initially in Yalta in early 44. But then when they knew that the end was coming and had come in Europe, things on the ground had changed. So they met in Potsdam, Germany, and you can go to Potsdam today, and you can go out there and you can see exactly where. I took a group there once where they signed the treaty, and the basic problem was that the Allies were advancing much faster than the Russians, and the distance from the Atlantic Ocean to Germany was about not that much shorter on the longer route than from Moscow, but they had covered that in about a year. From June to May, June 44 to May 1945. The Russians had taken 3 years, so they didn't know what to do, and they did not want to lose a lot of people. And they made a fundamental mistake when they met with Joseph Stalin to bite up the demarcation line. And it went like this. Well, the Russians, they'll take all the casualty. And they did. They lost 100,000 dead taking Berlin. But what they missed was the Germans would not have fought the Allies like they did the Russians. If the Allies had crossed into Berlin, the First and Third Armies, and the British First Army, the Germans would have thrown down their weapons and said, oh my God, they're not Soviets. But they didn't. And so when Patton got closer and could have got to Berlin first, Ike said, no, we don't want to get the Russians on our back. So the result of all this is Russia took the iconic city of Berlin, and then they divided up in zones. The French came in late, and they said, we're going to give you, under your operational control, the area near France. And then the Americans are going to have Bavaria, where Patton was coming up through, and the First Army. And then the British are going to get the northern sector, which they came, from Caen all the way straight. But we're going to give the whole eastern, that was the old Prussia. And when you look at the map, they got almost 45% of Germany, and the three allies had to divide them. Well, within a year, they realized that the communist, Stalin, was not going to honor any of his obligations, had no intent. All of the Eastern European occupational countries, Romania, Hungary, Poland, whatever was in Yugoslavia, they were all going communist, all of them. There was going to be no free elections as he'd promised. The best they could do was make a deal to save Greece and to save Turkey. And that's what Churchill did at Yalta, and then again the Americans at Potsdam. They said, we want we want control. The British want control of Greece. The Americans will control Turkey, because Turkey had been a neutral, but it was pro-German. But we don't want the Soviets in there. And then they said, we will compromise on Finland, which had resisted Russia, and Russia didn't want to go back into Finland, and Austria. So why don't we say that Austria and Finland will neither be in the Warsaw Pact, your new pact, or NATO, which NATO hadn't been formed, but it was coming. So they ended up disarmed and neutral. And they saved Greece as a non-communist country, and they saved Turkey. But they lost all of Eastern Europe. And then they had Germany. And by 1948, the French and the British and the Americans said, you know what? We're all in this together, so we're going to give up our own territorial control and combine into a new country called West Germany. So then East Germany was Russian. The biggest problem was they had agreed that Berlin at Potsdam would be divided into 4 sections, at Yalta even, but it was 70, 80 miles inside East Germany. So how can you get to it when you have to get in through Russian territory? And they were the allies of the Russians. But as soon as the war was over, the Russians started doing what Russian communists would do. They started delaying trains. They would have roadblocks. They would deny flights. And there was 2.5 million people in Berlin that were starving. And then they divided Berlin up in the sense that all the French sector, the British sector, and the American sector of Berlin are now West Berlin. And they wouldn't release food. So the Americans had to make a choice. And a lot of people in America said, there's no way we can save it. It's inside the Russian zone. And these people have on the ground, they haven't disarmed like we do. They have 1.7 million Red Army troops in occupied Eastern Europe. And we only have in Germany and the environs, the British, the Canadians, the Americans, maybe 80,000. We had completely demilitarized in that 3 years. And then Harry Truman asked certain people, Lucius Clay was the occupational proconsul, and he said, you can't argue that Americans should die for Berlin, but a free Berlin. But on the other hand, it's a matter of prestige, and they won't stop there. If they do this, and then there were leaks that the Soviet plans came out that they wanted to take all of Germany and wanted to go west into Europe. And so finally, Harry Truman said to General Clay, we're going to resist this. And how do we avoid another world war? And Truman said, we dropped the bomb 3 years ago, and they hadn't got the bomb yet. They didn't get till 49. So we had about 50 atomic bombs, and we had about, I don't know what they were, 50 or 60 what we call silver plate B-29s, which could drop them. And the Soviets knew that. So Truman said, can you come up with a way of, and Curtis LeMay, who was now the head of all U.S. Air Forces in Europe, been transferred. He just said, don't do this. We have much more naval power and air power than they do. We have the atomic bomb. We have better planes. We have more planes. So don't get on the ground. We'll just go buzz their bases, or we'll attack their bases and they said, no, that'll be World War III. And then Lucius Clay said, I got an idea. Why don't we just say, we will fly C-47s, the DC-3, 2 engines, and we had a new C-50, the DC-40 was the military version of the DC-3, and the larger 4-engine, I think it was C-57 or something, and it could carry about 20,000 pounds, and you can unload it in 5 minutes. So they said, why don't we just start sending planes? And at first they needed 10,000 tons a day. At first they were getting like a ton, and then they turned all these they got General Wittermeyer in there, and they got all the people who'd flown over the hump in Burma that knew how to do it. And within 3 months, they were delivering 8,000 to 10,000 tons a day. And they had stacked flights from West Germany all the way in every 4 minutes. And they put the onus on the Soviets. They said, we had a corridor according to the Potsdam Treaty. We're just flying right into West Berlin. We're not touching East Berlin. We're not landing in East Berlin. We're not driving through it. We're not going into East Germany. We're just going to drop food and coal and oil. And the Soviets didn't know what to do. And then Harry Truman said, if you shoot one down and if you kill, we're going to bomb you. And the Soviets for a year they did try to knock down a British plane. They tried to obstruct it, but they could not do it. And the result was that for 11 months, they kept West Berlin alive, and then they started getting smart themselves. They said, you know what? A lot of the stuff for East Germany comes from Germany. It sends food out. This was the agrarian part, the old baronial estates of the Prussian Junker class, Pomerania, Prussia. But it wasn't the Ruhr where all the money in the industry. And they just said, you know what? Maybe you're not going to get any industry. And and we're going to have a Deutschmark, and it's going to be a strong currency. And before they knew it, the Russians were begging them to include East Germany, and they said no, 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 no. And so they outweighed them, and it was a big success. And it showed, and that was the beginning. I made it sound too simple because the State Department was full of Alger Hiss people who said the Russians are leftists, they're wonderful, they won the war, they've lost 27 million people, they killed 3 out of every 4 German soldiers, you got to give them some slack, their country's been wasted, they're our ally, you're acting like the Nazi Germans are better. The West Germans were all Nazis, the East Germans have all apologized for what they did. So Harry Truman, who was a liberal Democrat, said, I'm sorry, that SOB lied to me, Stalin. And that was the beginning of the Cold War. And that was going to go on. The next thing we can talk about, the next big, of course, collision point was Korea in June of 1950, just less than a year afterwards. And Stalin was really angry. So when the North Koreans came to him and said, the communist Chinese, they had won the revolution. We can talk about that as well, the Chinese Communist Revolution. But Stalin said, you got to wait till I get a bomb. And he got a bomb in, I think, November 49. He didn't have a hydrogen bomb until 55, but once he had a bomb, then he was the one that okayed it, as long as the Chinese... He sent about 50,000 Russians to pilot and do the air defenses of North Korea, but there was 1 million Chinese that came across the Yalu in November of 1950.
Can I ask you before
Yes.
move on? 2 things. One is, who was doing the flyovers to supply West Berlin? Was it all the French, British, and American
No, it was mostly
militaries?
It was mostly about 25% or 30% were British pilots, and they had good transport planes. Most of them were DC-3. DC-3 had come online in 1933 or 34. It had been upgraded with Allison engines. It was one of the most. They're still flying today. It was one of the most. It was a Douglas 3. And then K-47, I think they call it in the military, but it was the most reliable plane, short plane, 2 engines. And then at the very end of the war, I don't think it saw service actually, they came through with a brilliant plane, the DC, I guess it was the K-57, and it had 4 engines, and it had that Allison Wasp engine, which was the best engine America made. They put it in the Thunderbolt fighter plane, and this was an upgraded, so you were getting close to like 2,500 horsepower and 4 engines, and it could carry 20 to 30 pounds, and it could fly. DC-3 was flying about 150 cruise speed. These could go about 250. And when they landed, they could unload, because it was a better plane, they could unload, 10 to 20 tons of stuff in 10 minutes. Some of them didn't even stop. They would go really slow along the runway, and then there were people in it and out. They would put them on pallets, and they would just push them out, and they had people with forklifts getting them off. Amazing. And they did it every 4 minutes.
Yeah, and so Russia cut off the railway that went into Berlin for the West because they had unified their currency. I believe that was the reason.
They had the Deutschmark.
So why didn't the Russians try to, shoot down these planes? I mean, did they just allow it to go on? Or did they make any effort?
They tried to make it very difficult. They tried to cut off all food to Berlin and starve it. They thought the western sector that was becoming West Germany was 100% reliant, as Germany had always been, on the breadbasket in the East, and they cut off all food supplies. But then the Americans got European and American grain, And a lot of the food came from America. I'll give you an example. My grandfather has books, I still look at them, upstairs of every year that he farmed, basically from when he came of age in 1910 till he died in 76. It's what you do on a farm every day. It's wonderful reading. I read them occasionally, and it has the price of raisins. And he only made money 3 times in his entire life. Every year he lost money. And one was right during World War I, where the price of raisins went to an astronomical $300 a ton. And that lasted from 1917 to about 1924, right before 25, before the Depression, it crashed. But in the Depression, in the 30s, he got $30 a ton. $30 a ton. 2,000 pounds at $30. And they used it for cattle feed. The government bought it for cattle feed. They mixed it with bourbon or sugar, and they fed the raisins. And then he made it again in World War II, because raisins were great to put in sea rations. But the point I'm getting at is they took raisins, and sometimes they put chocolate on them, sometimes they just use raisins. And they came up with the idea of Operation Little Vittles. So they would go over West Germany, and they would drop tons of little tiny sun-made raisin packs. So all these kids they drop them. They did all these early candies, and they got to win over the German people. The people on the ground who unloaded them were all German civilians. And it really brought the German people close to the Americans. And so there was a desperate demand for raisins. And then, of course, it crashed, and the next time he made any money was right before he died in the 60s boom for a while. But they bought raisins during this Berlin airlift. The reason that they didn't stop it is we had the most capable, he's not Buck Turgidson that we make fun of in Dr. Strangelove with a cigar in his mouth, but that's pattern, and to a lesser extent, George C. Scott was too. They were composite characters of Curtis LeMay. But Curtis LeMay had a cigar because he had palsy in his mouth. Yeah, Bell's palsy. And that it soaked up the saliva. So he didn't really want to smoke. And he didn't smoke them, he just chewed them. And in any case, he had solved the B-17 problem. He had stacked squadrons. He worked with Doolittle on fighter escort. He went over to save the B-29 program. He founded Strategic Air Command, and he was in charge in Europe. And everybody was afraid of. He was a complete genius. He's probably the greatest Air Force general we've ever had. We didn't have jets that were comparable because the Soviets got first the best scientists from Germany and the Messerschmitt scientists. So our early jets were not as good as not till the F-86 Sabre. But my point is that he had enough conventional. He had Mustangs and Thunderbolts, and he had bombers, and he had overwhelming. And he warned the Soviets. He said, if you're going to do this and you start on the ground shooting us, or you try to shoot our planes down, we know where your bases are. We're going to obliterate them. And he had the bomb. At that time, we had 50 atomic bombs, and we had these silver plate B-29s that were adapted to drop them. And so, believe it or not, we had the Europeans on our side. The French, we had armed the French 1st Armored Division. The British were on our side. So we had more air power and naval power, and we could blockade the coast if we had to. But we didn't have the ground power. That was the problem. They were all disbanded and home.
So I don't know if you were planning on talking about the Japanese occupation at another time, but we hear not very much about it except that we did occupy. I know that my own father told me that he was in the war at the very last year, given his age, and that their ship in the Pacific landed in Osaka for about 8 days or so, and then that was all he saw of Japan. But I don't know anything about that occupation. Were you going to do it later, or?
Yeah, I'm going to do it, but there was a key point, and that was if you try to take Honshu and the mainland in these two operations of November 45 and March of 46, it's going to look like Okinawa on steroids. And we lost 50,000 casualties on Okinawa. And that was just a month before the war was over. My namesake, Victor Hanson, died on May 19th. in the middle of the battle, June 19th, July, August. So you can see it was this 90 days. So his family had been following him in all these terrible places. And then they realized that he was going to make it because the war was over in Germany. But then he died right before. So that everybody had that feeling that if we go in there, they're all going to get killed because they're going to do what they did in Okinawa, but they're going to have the homeland with 60 million people. So we made a terrible mistake at Yalta and reiterated it at Potsdam, where we said within 90 days of the end of the European front, the Soviet Union promises to use its huge 12 million man army to help us in the Pacific. And the Soviets' attitude under Stalin was, are you kidding? Are you serious? This is the best news I've ever heard, because you did all the dirty work for 4 years. You got all the people killed. You had to do the bombing. You went to god-awful places like Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Burma, Philippines, Corregidor. And now that it's almost over, you're inviting us to come in? Well, we'll come in. And the first thing we're going to do is make sure that Mao Zedong destroys Chiang Kai-shek, and we're going to give him all of our weapons. And then the second thing we're going to go into Mongolia, and it's going to be ours, and Manchuria. And the third thing we're going to do is we're going to sweep down into North Korea, and we'll be the occupational half. And then the next thing we'll do, we'll take the Sakhalin Islands for the Japanese. And then we'll be poised to take all of South Korea. And we had nobody there. It was stupid. We didn't need them at all because we had this great idea that we were not going to invade the mainland and get into a 10-year ambush Afghanistan. We just said we're not going to do it. So we bombed them with a firebomb. That's what made them quit, the firebombing. And then the two real atomic bombs shocked them. And then we said the emperor gets to stay, even though he was so complicit. And Hirohito was such a fraud. I don't know what's going on. Oh, I paint. Oh, I write haiku. Oh, I'm a botanist. I'm an entomologist. No, he was the one. Every time there had been a critical point, should we go to war? Yes. Should we bomb Pearl? Yes. Should we do it? Yes. He was needed, but we were smart. MacArthur said we're going to keep him, and we're going to have land reform. So we'll break up the big estates. We're going to have women's right to vote. We're going to reportion in districts. It was a very enlightened. We're not going to criticize the German. We're going to have very few. There wasn't Nuremberg trials. I mean, they did shoot Tojo, and they shot Hama, and they shot a few in the Philippines, but not as much. It wasn't as publicized as Germany. And then it was all ours. There was nobody to share it with because we did all the work. And so, but the problem was we invited the Soviets in. But the Japanese were all on our side. What saved Japan was the Korean War because we were based in Japan right next to Korea, and we used it as a huge supply depot. I can remember when I was 9 years old, there was a joke, and it was called, "Don't give me that, it's made in Japan." And it was like junk. And there was they had things like little fake parasols or little toys, or they had little transistor radios with one tube in it or something. And I can remember when they bought the first Subaru, it had just you had to mix the gas and the oil, and Honda. And then all of a sudden people said, oh my God, Icon, they're better than oh my gosh, Honda, it's better. They used to call it Honda cars. I have a Honda car, meaning it's not the motorcycle. And so, but that all took off during the Korean War when we inundated them with American dollars and demands for war material, food, gas, cars, everything.
All right, Victor, so let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll come back to finish the show, and we'll talk about sleeper cells, Iranian sleeper cells, and other ICE issues. And then also Joe Rogan interviewed Bernie Sanders, and there was some fallout from that. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Victor Davis Hanson Show, and I hope everybody who likes to watch these shows on video are coming to either YouTube or Rumble or Spotify. We have them distributed on all three platforms, so I hope you'll join us there. So, Victor, I wanted to ask you about the of course, our concern and everybody's concern is sleeper cells of Iranians, because the Iranians obviously would do anything that they could to disrupt us. And so ICE has arrested, I think, 11 this weekend. And one of them was Mehran Sahili, and he was a former Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps member, and he was also linked to Hezbollah. So I think our government is doing their job quite well.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 deterrents that were not there during the Biden. If this had happened during the Biden administration, I'd be very concerned. But we have a secure border now, so it's a matter not of who's coming in, but finding out who Biden let in. There's probably about 1,000 Iranians, and most of them have had deportation hearings, and we know where they are. And we know where the Iranian communities are, so they're not going to be hard to find. I would imagine the majority of them just wanted to get out of Iran, but we don't know that. And so we've got ICE and Border Patrol that are really good now, and they're going to find them. But the next question is, well, what if they don't find a cell? Well, if they don't find a cell and the cell were to kill a lot of Americans, what would happen? We know what would happen. Donald Trump would call up Missouri and he'd say, I need those B-2s again. And then he'd say to the Iranians, after we had a ceasefire, you allowed this to go on. And so you say your nuclear plants were not completely destroyed. And you said that we didn't really do much. So for the next week, we're going to finish it. And we're going to bomb. And if you try to shoot us down, we're going to destroy it. That's what he would do if it was a serious terrorist. And they know that. So I don't think they're going to do it. I really don't.
Well, I hope not. So let's then turn to another ICE detention that was super interesting. Was ICE caught a Californian, or a guy in California, Alexander Guevara, and he was explaining to ICE as they were dragging him out that he was protected by a DCAT, which is a deferral of removal due
And
to
he was a
Convention
convicted
Against
murderer,
Torture.
wasn't he?
Yeah, he was obviously
He's a murder gang member.
a criminal. Yeah, and so as they were dragging him out, he said, "No, I applied for this."
I know
DCAT,
Bill. I think it was Bill Manoogan, the Fox reporter, followed him around and started interviewing him. And you think he's just going to be this thug, and he's so versed on how to manipulate the law. Actually, you should look at the documents. Basically, he said, "I'm a murderer that your crazy government got out on legal technicality, and I can prove it. Just look it up." And he said, "My lawyer will talk to you." Here's a illegal guy from Central America who should have never been here, has committed a murder, and
wasn't he also a gang member, I think, as well?
You know what? How to conclude about all this stuff, when I see all of these district judges, like we had a flight, I think we were taking people, was it back to Somalia? And it made it stop halfway. And the judge then tried to, and I want to say to all of this, we understand the law, yes, but if you look at what ICE is doing, they're picking up illegal people. And these people didn't have a right to come into the country. And they never called these district judges and said, I'd like to come in. Can I apply for citizenship? No. And they broke the law. They didn't show up for their hearings. They didn't do anything. So it's like, well, I didn't show up for my immigration hearing and nobody said anything, do you? But so I'm guilty of something. But guess what? If I keep doing this and doing this and doing this, and finally they arrest me, that judge in San Francisco is going to take my cause free. And that's what's happened. But what they don't understand is they think we have unlimited wealth. So when they just nullify all of these people who are dreadful criminals, and they turn entire flights back, and they tell ICE you can't do this. They're costing us millions of dollars in time, and they make it so hard. Just one person. And then they go back to some beautiful home that they live in, and they live in La La Land, you know what I mean? And it's all contingent on the idea that I'm a judge in the 9th District, I'm a district judge, and I live up in, I don't know, Presidio Heights, and Juan is my gardener. And that's another thing that I don't understand about them, the left. They cannot mention this topic without, oh, who's going to pick our strawberries? Who's going to do our meat packing? Oh, in Los Angeles, we do all this. Well, then you don't do it. Don't invite people from a foreign country to break the law, and do it yourself. Or one woman that was a congresswoman said they wipe our blank. They're so racist the way they do that. And When I was growing up, this is important, that there were very, very few Mexican-American laborers here. And most of the ones that were here were in something called the bracero program, which means braceros is arms, the arms. And it was very hard to get a bracero. You had to be have some in. And they came in every year and they were put in barracks. And then they were contracted out to farms, and the farms paid them $1 an hour. This is when the minimum wage was like $1.75. I always worked for $1.25. But and then they sent $1 back to Mexico to ensure they would return. Well, every year after the harvest season, and it was very sad because they would say, Southwest Fresno County, 6 braceros broke out or on the loose, because they didn't want to go back. And finally, they sued because Mexico stole all their money. The banks did. Mexico doesn't want to talk about that, but most of the half the wages they never got. And I think a lot of people sued Mexico. But my point is this: then who did the farm work? Well, I can tell you, in my family, it was the Marshall family from Oklahoma and their relatives. And there were a group called the Camingos. They were from the Philippines. And there were us. There were 5 grandkids. And we had a skeleton crew of the Marshalls. And then we had a guy named Gregory from Texas. And he was Mexican, American, not illegal. And Gregory had 3 kids. And he had a crew that I think his name was Gonzalez. The Gonzaleses had a patch of grapes to pick, and the Filipinos had a patch, and the poor whites from Oklahoma had a patch, and then we had a patch. And we all worked for... The school didn't start until the raisin harvest was over. It didn't start till September 8th. It was after Labor Day, or 8th or 9th for harvest, because all the kids had to work. And so my point is, and there was very little mechanization compared to now. Now you see entire quarter-mile rows of raisins, and they're all on trellises, and a machine goes by and clips the canes, and they dry on the vine, and then another machine comes through, shakes them all, and then another machine puts them into a dehydrator if they're not completely dry. So this idea that America can't survive without illegal alien labor from Mexico it's
bogus. It's just
crazy.
as bogus
They're
as
already
everything
doing
else
meat packing plants now. They're short labor, so they're saying we're going to have higher wages, and we're going to have nicer conditions, and we're going to have more machinery. Well, of course they will, but they're never going to mechanize if you can get cheap labor from Mexico.
All right. So these last 2 things are somewhat of a comic interlude. Joe Rogan interviewed Bernie Sanders, and he caught him off guard on climate change, which Bernie Sanders heartily supports. And he said that the climate change scientists, or new ones, have been looking at the long run climate in the world, and that there's ups and down, cold and hot periods in historically. And so that was one thing. So this whole idea of climate change is always going on, and it's natural. And the second thing was, though, that really got Bernie Sanders was that he also showed him that the scientists that were supporting this detrimental climate change position were financially compromised by the industry that needs to
by
have
China.
it. Was it by China?
By China.
Yeah.
China has front groups that really wants environmentalism, so they can continue to build coal plants that are cheap, and we'll worry about global warming. They want that because they think that the more solar and wind that we have, the less efficient our industries will be. And the more coal that they have, the more efficient they will be. It's true. So when the whole problem with these people is that they all have to use projections or guesses or computer simulations, because we only have records in the United States in the arid parts that we're concerned about, 1860, 1870, 1880. And so when you want to guess about what the climate was, tree rings, ice samples in glacier, that's not very accurate. And so then they project. It turns out, Joe Rogan is right, that there's wild swings every 300 or 400 or 500 years. We had Earth Day in 1970, and I think I mentioned we buried an engine at my high school, but I can remember still the Newsweek cover story. It showed the Earth with ice. It was like a snow cap over the Earth, and it was like where we were. And we always said to our teacher, "Are we going to get too cold?" "Yes, boys." I can remember Mr. Martin. He was a great science teacher in 8th grade. He said, "Yes, boys. There's two fundamental crises that we're all going to face your generation. One, global freezing. We're going to be really. You're going to have to wear overcoats. It's going to be the little ice age." Now, it won't last long. We said, "Mr. Martin, how long will it last?" "Maybe 300 years, but we'll be dead." He said, "No, boys, you will be born into it and die into it." He was a really good teacher. And then I said, "Well, what's the next one?" "The next one is the population bomb." We're, population bomb? Yes. Everybody's having 3 or 5 children. Then they're going to have 6, and then they're going to have 7. And the United States will have somewhere around 700 million people by the year 2000. And the planet will have 15 billion. Well, how do we know that? Paul Ehrlich at Stanford. And everything was wrong about it. We're going to have, the United States is going to shrink. Europe is shrinking. We have cat ladies, right? No children. And the planet is, I don't know if it's going to go cold. Just as much chance I think it's going to go cold as it's going to go hot. But if they want to ruin the economy, it's not about worrying about global warming. It's another agenda that the left has. And that's something about, we want no emissions because we're wealthy and privileged and morally superior, and we want perfect air, and you're going to try to kill me and ensure I can't live to be 99 or something. You know what I mean? It's this utopian, when your essential needs are all met and surf it, then you try to be utopian.
All right, Victor. And so the last thing that, and again, this was really amusing. The NATO, as everybody knows, Trump went for meetings with NATO, and the NATO chief apparently called Trump daddy. What was that all about?
Well, Trump in 2017 looked at NATO. There's 32 NATO members now. I think there was 30 then. And they had, in 2014, they had all pledged to do one thing. They said, NATO was in shambles. It was in pretty good shape during the Cold War. It was in shambles. They cut the budget. They slashed their crap. And Trump went over there and said, well, Article 5 says that we have to intervene, and we're spending 3.5% of GDP, and we've got this huge GDP, and we're spending about anywhere from 15 to 25% of the budget. And so they said, well, what's your point? And he said, well, Obama said you were free riders, and you are. So why have only 5 countries out of 32 met their obligations? And this is the year 2017, and you have been lying for 3 years. And Canada's only spent 1/3, and they got so angry. And then he said, and we're going to go for, you just did a deal with Russia on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. You're importing Russian natural gas. And if they invade Ukraine or something, you're going to call us to come over and save you after you're cutting this deal with your former chancellor is on their board? You people are pathetic. We're not going to come over here unless you pay. And they went nuts. And they called their friends in the Transatlantic Council, the Council on Foreign. Hey, you guys, Professor, John Kerry, what is this Trump? Oh, don't worry. He's a crazy. He doesn't speak for us. He is nuts. He's questioning the sanctity of NATO. Well, what he did was he put the fear of God into them. And they were afraid that we were going to get out. So they upped it on average to about 1.5%. And he went from 6%, 5 nations. When he left office, there was about 17, 18. And they added $100 billion in arms, and that came in very handy during the Ukraine war. So then he comes back, and he says, I'm back. And so they're going, well, we don't like this blank blank, but he did save us last time because he treated us like little kids that needed to be spanked, and it worked. So what do you want, Donald? And he says, well, we're spending too much money. I'm not sure that I can go to the relief of a country like Spain. Spain said, I'm not going to spend 2%. I'm not going to spend 5%. And Trump said, now it's 5%. We haven't even made 5%. Then Trump said, I don't know if we're going to make 5%, but it doesn't matter because we're still going to be spending the most money because our economy is so big. So then they said, okay, and all of a sudden they agreed to 5% because they're right on the doorstep of Russia. So then Trump comes back and announces that now there's 23 of 32 nations that have met their 2% because of Trump. And now they promise to go up to 5. And of course, the Spanish Socialist Communist foreign minister said that they are not going to go up to 5 and they might not make it to 2. And Trump just basically said, okay, I hope you don't get in a war. And the same thing with Canada. Although Mr. Carney in Canada says he's going to spend $40 billion and get up there. So they hated Trump on NATO, and he saved NATO, basically. And all the mellifluous, sober, and judicious language by Obama and Biden and Clinton and Bush, it didn't do any good at all.
So the last thing, and you've kind of talked about this, or at least you mentioned it, Spain's grid went down some weeks ago, and they finally came out to announce that they had turned off the thermal power stations, those stations that are powered by coal.
Yeah, it was a big,
at peak hours.
It was a big publicity stunt. They wanted to say to Spain, "Hey, everybody, for the next 6 hours, every single kilowatt of electricity is renewable. It's coming from wind or solar or hydro." And it wasn't windy enough, and it got dark too soon, and they had no backup, and the whole grid collapsed, and they had to import oil and coal and nuclear generated electricity from France to save them and to spark and to reboot the whole system. So, and that was Spain again. So you want to say to the Spanish, you don't want to pay your NATO contributions because you're a green country, but you don't even do that very well. You're just destroying your country. And then, I don't know, it's kind of ironic that Spain, that gave us Franco and was pro-Nazi during the entire World War II, starts to take the high ground, you know what I mean, against us and said, we're not going to spend that. And we're going to be in NATO, but we've refused to make this new 5% commitment.
Yeah, that little bluster about moral superiority because our president is Donald Trump and somehow the Americans are no good because of that.
This is something that the American left cannot digest, that somebody that they hate, that somebody who tweets about people's IQs and, crooked Biden and lying this and crude.
Stupid AOC.
Stupid AOC. He can actually affect more moral change than they can. In other words, he gets NATO to pay their fair share. He gets the Iranians to stop nuclear. He's going to close the border and save a lot of lives. And they can't handle it because he does it in a way that they are sober and judicious and amoral, and he's loud and rambunctious and moral. And most people would rather be comfortable with somebody who doesn't, like Obama, that doesn't do anything or causes problems, than to have somebody who, like Rodney Dangerfield in any one of his movies, but the one with Bill Murray.
Caddyshack.
Well, that is Donald Trump, and he got things done. And who are they? The Europeans on the left. They're that judge, whatever his name was, that ran the country club and tried to keep him out.
All right, Victor. So we're at the end of the show, and we have a comment on your 10 questions about Iran, which I believe appeared in the American Greatness magazine. But on your website, we have a comment from Albert Smith. Our allies are now super amazed at how perfect the mission was carried out. They weren't even told except for top-level British air officers. That's how successful the secrecy of the plan was. And I was also amazed at that. Democrats learned that they realistically cannot be trusted, not with military secrets, nor with most anything else. President Trump is using his genius of leadership to rebuild America using his intuitive and experiential knowledge of people, competence, and expertise of building a private real estate empire. We are enormously fortunate to have him as our president. So there you go, Donald J. Trump.
Well, I mean, they said the narrative about Pete Hegseth, I went back and looked at all the Political Atlantic, all these essays on him. Can't keep secrets, unprofessional, amateurs around him. The Signal chat where they had the wrong, they brought in Mr. Goldberg came in, and now all of a sudden the most secretive, best kept secret since D-Day, you know what I mean? It was very professional, and Hegseth has sort of reclaimed It's kind of funny that everybody got angry because he drank too much and he womanized too much and they tried to stop him. But when you actually look at what he's done, it's pretty amazing. He kind of got rid of all the DEI drag and he got back the 45,000 recruits. He got 10,000 a day. It's just as impressive as closing the border. He and Tom Holland have done amazing things. And Rubio has really changed the State Department from kind of an anti-American, let's fly the pride flag in Afghanistan, to just foreign relations or deterrence. So they've got really good people. There is no Rex Tillerson. There is no, people like Jim Mattis, whom I like, a friend of mine, but he wasn't on the same page as Trump. There was not a John Bolton, although John Bolton was on TV the other day, and they said, what about, and he was very supportive, but he did not use the T word. I support this strike. It should have been done long ago. It's going to help eliminate this. And you would have thought the planes were on autopilot or they were Teslas or something, because he never could mention Donald Trump. Bill Kristol and those people, the same thing, they wouldn't have had to do this if Trump hadn't screwed this, that kind of stuff. They can't. I'm trying to think of a nice thing I could say about Obama's, but I'm still searching for the 8 years to give him credit for something.
Didn't he take out one of the...
Bin Laden.
He did.
I give him credit for that because he had to go into
big
Pakistan.
Yeah.
And he had to bomb areas around Pakistan.
But
Joe Biden was against it, of course.
Wasn't it like the sixth, this military group, and then there was a whole bunch of them on a plane after that got shot down and they were killed?
I'm not sure. I'll have to look at that. He did...
The 6th Marine Corps or something. I forget.
He did Predators a lot. But that was just... he made fun of, he actually laughed about it. Predator, Predator. You date my daughter and it's called Predator. Then John Brennan, who's always on TV lying, he was saying that right after the ceasefire, he said, well, we have to deal with the Iranians and let them enrich uranium over 3%, and then we'll see and kind of guide them into it, and then they won't why would they ever go over 3%, John? And why are you in TV when you were one of the organizers of the 51 intelligence authorities that swore to us that Hunter's laptop was cooked up in Moscow? And that was on top of your 2 earlier lies under oath. You said there was no collateral damage with Predators. There was a lot. And then you said that your CIA was not spying on Senate staffer computers, and you were. So you perjured yourself under oath twice. Then you lied to the country to warp an election. And you've never paid one... they put Steve Bannon in jail and Peter Navarro for not honoring a weaponized congressional subpoena. And this guy lied under oath twice, and they never did a thing to him. Should have been charged with perjury. And he's plaguing us today.
Well, Victor, that's the end of our show here. We'd like to thank our audience for joining us, and thank you for all of your wisdom, and especially the Berlin Airlift today. It was wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
This is Sami Winc and Victor Davis Hanson, and we are signing off.